Hey guys, welcome back to the Mind Refinery Podcast. As usual, I am your host, Kyle Bodanis. Before we get into the show, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's been going on in the US. All of us were horrified by what we saw happen to George Floyd. The fact it continues is an obscenity and an indictment of a system that just doesn't recognize the importance of black people. We think it's important as Canadians we take time to reflect on ourselves, though. There is a troubling misconception that we do not have systemic racism in our country. This was reflected in Ontario Premier Doug Ford's statements on Monday. For me, patriotism is an overused statement. It's not flags and fireworks and blind allegiance. True patriotism comes from trying to live up to your national myths, not thoughtlessly peddling them. In our country, statistics surrounding things like mass incarceration, upward mobility, child mortality rates, and life expectancy all point to a system that does not protect people of color as it does those with white skin. We have police brutality in this country, we have white nationalism, we've had segregation. Prior to the British banning slavery across the empire, we had slave owners in this country and in our beloved city. In fact, in Toronto, we have streets named after those slaveholders. Know your history. This company is proud to be Canadian, but it's dangerous for us to assume that racism is just an American problem. It's not. So before you go full-on complacent, think about it. Think about the people of color in your life with their head under that cop's knee. That shit happens here too. All this is without even touching on our treatment of our Indigenous people and our lack of decisive efforts towards reconciliation. Our suggestion? Donate to black causes, support black businesses, and get into the streets. But the big thing, the number one thing you can do to start this whole thing, get informed. Read, watch documentaries, go on YouTube and watch lectures, listen to people of color. We guarantee it'll not only help the community and our society, but it could awaken something within you. This week on the Mind Refinery Podcast, we're talking about the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance. I hope you all watched it. It was incredible. We held off on dropping this podcast because we wanted to get out the Adrian Forte interview to coincide with his ass kickery on Top Chef Canada. We had a lot of fun with this one. Hope you enjoy it. And now, without further ado, here's the show. Now, we didn't want to talk about Michael Jordan and whether or not he was a serial killer level competitive psychopath or, what this meant for his legacy. A lot of people have done that already. It's kind of what everyone has been doing, especially on sports radio. Our premise was simple. Assemble the 5 most entertaining or poignant interview subjects across all 10 episodes of the documentary. To help create The Last Dance, all doc team here, Mind Refinery creatives, John Neal and Andrew Vinny. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with our honorable mentions and then begin going through. Actually, you know what, guys? Let's start with, first of all, what do we, and just overall high level here, what do we think of the documentary?
I loved it. Super entertaining documentary. It was a real page turner of a documentary.
Yeah, fully agreed. It's just the most entertaining thing I've seen in a lot. And I think, especially now that it sat in for a few weeks or had the chance to sink in, the access. It's so rare that a documentary gets to have a character make a statement and then immediately get 5 perspectives of 5 other people involved. And so the fact that absolutely everybody was in this documentary just really brought it to another level. And kind of what John said about the page turner, I thought the pacing is just incredible.
Yeah.
Really great watch.
I absolutely loved it. For me, a lot of nostalgia. I mean, I was kind of watching it like, some of these, some of our friends who had already watched Game of Thrones, read the books for Game of Thrones and how they were like anticipating what people were going to, how they were going to react to things, because, there's a lot of source material for this. The Jordan Rules is a big one too. Is a big one. I thought it was fantastic. It was a great hang. That was the big thing. It's like, I genuinely was looking forward to every week's episode, and that's for me the hallmark of a good show, where I need to watch it right away. Like, we don't get too many things like that anymore. We're in this binge watch. There's not a lot of event, either television or streaming or whatever, right? That's why it was kind of cool about Game of Thrones before, is that you had that event television, and now it's like...
Well, I mean, 90 Day Fiancé's thing did go last night. I'm pretty sure it came close to breaking the internet.
Yeah, I mean...
Not that I personally am into that, but some of these events still happen.
I feel like shows like 90 Day Fiance are going to give me 90-day weed and alcohol addiction, which is more like
90-day program.
90-day program. So, okay, guys, we like the documentary. That's good. Let's get into our honorable mentions when we were going through this. Now, one that came up, it was very close, was the heart-wrenching story of Steve Kerr. So, in my opinion, this was kind of like one of the emotional touchstones of the whole series. Steve Kerr's well beloved and so well spoken. Generally seems like a cool guy. And then you know, if you weren't in the know, then a lot of people didn't know about this whole his dad like dying in a bombing in Beirut. And I thought that he was really good. The parts where he's talking about getting in a fight with Jordan are fucking hilarious as well. What do you guys think about Kerr?
Steve, what I liked about Steve Kerr was just the documentary in general did a really good job of exploring the backstories of all these poignant side characters. So Steve Kerr it was just interesting to me because I didn't really know much about him outside of him from his coaching career with the Golden State Warriors. I wasn't as familiar with his tenure with the Bulls. And yeah, I knew nothing about his story. So it was cool just to kind of see sort of his perspective on everything, being, I guess, more of a grunt player, not really the superstar, just part of the supporting cast. I don't know. I just really thought his story was super interesting because I didn't really know much about it. And just the way, I guess, he told it and his whole experience with the Bulls was just really cool.
So John and I had Steve Kerr on our lists. Vanny, what kept Steve Kerr off of your list?
Mostly I think because I knew you guys were going to pick it, and a lot of people were talking about him in there. But at the same time, I think I really enjoyed all of his commentary. One, he's just incredibly articulate, and given that this documentary is full of some pretty huge egos and super athletes and stuff like that, his ability to articulate how a situation emotionally affected him really stuck out to me. And that was perfect way, like everything, this documentary is of course centered around Jordan, even though it's the last dance of the Bulls. It was very much like that it was still all around Jordan. And so Kerr's explanation of those experiences really helped paint a more I think a more gray picture, like in terms of just not black and white. Like it was very hate sometimes, love sometimes, outrageous sometimes.
And this guy had to stand up to Jordan too. I mean, that's kind of like that is how he got his respect. Michael Jordan's he's like an alpha predator. So he comes up to you and, he fucks with you. And if you don't stand up to him, it's like he knows you're weak. And it's the same thing with Bill Cartwright. Bill Cartwright really was the only one who stood up to him too. I thought in terms of Bill Cartwright, they underplayed his story because his whole thing was he was actually the leader of that Bulls team, the first 3 title teams before he went to play baseball. And the guys had massive respect for him, but for whatever reason, Jordan just kept talking shit about him. And Bill Cartwright was just like, listen, if you're going to keep doing that, I will literally injure you in practice. And Jordan just, I think that's the thing that gets him all sentimental, being threatened. So I want to move on to Larry Bird, because we both had Larry, I thought Larry Bird was kind of interesting in this documentary.
Yeah. I love Larry Bird. I just have as far as discussing basketball and even the history of basketball and the Magic and Bird era, just super serious. It just takes basketball very seriously, right? He's just one of those guys, and anytime that he's in something, I'll watch it. I just love Larry Bird. There's just something about that guy that I love. Now that he's also done coaching and playing, I think he's a little bit more open to sort of discussing things, even just humor, even with humor and stuff like that too.
I really like So throughout, at the beginning of the documentary, I watched it with my wife, and she didn't really know who Larry Bird or Magic Johnson was. So there's like this almost ascension story. There's a million sub stories in this doc, but there's like this ascension story of kind of Jordan talking about like, when I'm going to be at that level or with those guys, I want to be on that, because there were the two living greats that were still around the league and doing these things. And when they showed Bird and Johnson on the screen, she was just like, who's the old man? Like, who's that GM sitting on the screen? Like, just no idea. And I just think he looks as ever awesome in this as he does. Just this weird kind of curmudgeonly, straight shooting Larry Bird.
Yeah.
I like his epic shit talking. I mean, like, obviously, right?
Yeah, so I replace straight shooting with epic shit talking.
Yeah, I think that's more, like,
more accurate.
Like calling these, like, saying don't start with that shit, and like fuck you, and then also you have to realize, like, for his ability to keep his sense of humor, which I'm sure is fueled by numerous titles with the Celtics. I mean, this guy was beaten by Jordan as a player, had to deal with Jordan as a player. And then, I mean, that Indiana Pacers team he was the coach of.
Yeah.
I mean, that team for me was probably the closest to actually beating the Jordan team. They were the one. Yeah. They were the ones who were put together to do that. I think literally the difference is that Michael Jordan has a fifth gear, like a sixth gear, and can take it to another level. But I mean, like, that was like Mark Jackson, Rick Smits, Reggie Miller. Like, it was a pretty intense team. And then, like, the dude from French Lick, Indiana, fucking, I mean, that makes the most sense that is his team, because it was a curmudgeon-y team.
I love that story too. I wasn't really aware of what was going on in the NBA at that time. I was probably a little too young. And just that whole sub-story, I think because the Bulls were so dominant, my memory of this, of both three-peats, was that they were just unstoppable, and it was more like this inevitability that they were going to win. And while there obviously was that, I didn't necessarily realize how difficult and how close they came to not doing that.
I think that's one of the things that was really good that they put together about putting together this documentary, is that there's obviously a recency bias with certain things, especially in terms of, like, you know, how your interpretation of, like, professional basketball in the NBA is, because it's often seen through the lens of LeBron James or Kobe Bryant, because that's when people, I mean, realistically, Kobe Bryant enters the league in the late 90s, and LeBron, drafted in 2003. So, you know, a lot of people, they didn't realize all this stuff was happening, because the only thing that kind of transcended basketball was Jordan's personality himself. But, I mean, a lot of people don't know the ins and outs of the Utah Jazz. A lot of people don't know how Steve Kerr landed a winning shot in the series. They didn't know about the whole drama around it, and how, you know, the opponents, who they were, and what it meant for them. Like, I'm sure Clyde Drexler could have done without the entire world knowing that his career was defined by not being as good as Michael Jordan for the rest of his life after the finals loss.
Yeah.
Did they? I can't remember. I don't think they had an interview with Clyde Drexler.
No, they didn't.
If I was him, I wouldn't have done it. That's what Karl Malone did do. Did anybody see this little interview with Karl Malone afterwards that he did? It was ESPN was pushing it. It was like him smoking a cigar, and they're asking, why is Karl... I will share it with you if you haven't seen it. They're like, you know, why didn't you do it? Why didn't you... Asking about Jordan. He's like, why do I have to?
Yeah,
he's
he doesn't.
Like, exactly. He's like, why do I... why is that something I need to do? They beat us, and that's it. And, like, what else is there to say about it? As we move down this list of honorable mentions, we have, and I'm really surprised that none of us really put this on our primary list. I mean, did I put it on my primary list? Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas was obviously the largest lightning rod of controversy, criticism in this, especially since, again, it's this idea where there's a whole generation of kids don't know. I mean, there's a whole generation of kids who don't understand that Isaiah Thomas was likely one of the best point guards. Sorry, not likely, is the one top three of all time point guard. I mean, I think you're looking at Magic Johnson and then him.
He was everywhere in the 90s. Yeah. Like, you didn't have to be a basketball fan to know who Isaiah Thomas was.
Yeah.
You listen,
when you're on Fresh Prince
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
90.
I forgot
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's like, yeah, there's a problem for Isaiah Thomas. And his name is Will Smith.
I think that, and like the Isaiah Thomas stuff. I first of all, I was really surprised that he went and did. I mean, it's points to him for actually coming out and doing that interview, because that's super uncomfortable. And like, this was an opportunity to play on one of the best teams ever assembled, and he got supposedly shut out because of relationship issues. I mean,
Mhm.
do you think that's a legitimate reason to keep someone off a team?
No.
So you think he got screwed?
Yeah. I mean, well, I understand that it's basketball and that perhaps the thinking around how to assemble a team and how to deal with egos and all that stuff might come into play more so than, let's say, on a hockey team, just as another example. On paper, it certainly seems that way, though. Like, if you were to put that team on paper and be like, oh, yeah, Isaiah Thomas is not going to be on the team, on paper, you'd probably be like, what? Really? Why?
Yeah, and
just from a skill standpoint, like just from a playing standpoint alone, I think you'd be like, what?
So what I kind of liked about all of Isaiah's parts, actually, I liked a lot about it. When different people are talking about him, you can hear this kind of reserve. You can almost tell who spoke up and who was afraid, and maybe have later reconciled that fear and got to know him, or their friendship grew, or professional relationship grew beyond that. But Isaiah Thomas was not afraid of Michael Jordan. Neither is Reggie Miller. And I think we're going to talk about that later because we all have him on our list. But that really comes through even now when he's talking about those interactions, whatever. There's bad blood there, but the fear was not part of it.
Yeah. The other thing that I liked about him in this too is he's a very well-spoken guy, and he does seem rather genuine for someone that has had all of this controversy about him and Jordan, and just the way they played and all this stuff. He seems like a pretty genuine person on camera, at least. Right. I can't speak to what he's like behind closed doors.
Are there other examples, Kyle? Like, did other people have professional problems with him on the court and stuff like that?
Well,
was he known as the big asshole, I guess, to put it?
Well, it's hard to tell because he was with the biggest asshole team of all time, the Detroit, the Bad Boy Pistons. I mean, I guess compared to Lame Beer, he is a less of an asshole. But that was the whole thing behind it, is that I believe it was Michael Wilbon was trying to say that it was multiple people on the team who were having problems with Isaiah Thomas, and then he kind of had to go on Social Network a few days later and kind of be like, that isn't the case. I think if you're Jordan and Scotty, that's I think I wouldn't be surprised if it was just Jordan and Pippen, and then people being like around them saying, okay, well, if it's going to fuck up chemistry of probably the two best players on the team, then it's probably not a good idea. I mean, I wouldn't want to piss off Michael Jordan, but at the end of the day, I mean, that team, I guess there's arguments about who would come off. I mean, for me, the only one is Mullen, who could really come off, but then people make the argument, well, you need shooting and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty tough. But I mean, then again, do you need another point guard? You got Magic Johnson, but at the end of the day, there's injuries. So for me, just given the fact that Isaiah Thomas is probably the second best point guard of all time, they had John Stockton. I don't know. Maybe.
Well, it's like it's literally like assembling a Team Canada team for hockey, and your B and C team would still be the best, right? Like it's basically the equivalent of subbing someone in.
Well, you would have had at that point. You would have had the three best point guards of all time.
Exactly. So it's like, you can debate it all you want. I don't think necessarily his involvement with the team would have made them necessarily any better or any worse.
Do they need to be better?
Well, exactly. Right?
Yeah.
Like, how good do they need to be? Yeah, I know.
Like how do you not think your team has enough? Do you not think you're bringing enough firepower to the Olympics right now? Mm-hmm. You have like 3 of the top 5 players of all time on on the team.
It was honestly pretty reminiscent of America's approach to war with a smaller country.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we're invading Grenada. Can someone fuel those Tomahawk cruise missiles?
Yeah.
We better bring 2-3 aircraft carriers.
Yeah. Invading Grenada is like invading my neighborhood. It's like, it's just, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not, like, calm down, America. Okay,
Yeah.
one important guy, Gus. Gus, this story I thought was crazy. And this is kind of the counterbalance to a lot of people who are like, Jordan's an asshole, where I think he's an asshole when it comes to basketball,
Sure.
right? Like,
And winning and all that stuff.
exactly. But if you were just shooting the shit with him, he's probably cool.
Oh, I'm sure he's a great ball breaker.
Yeah, but this
It'd
is
be
like,
fun to have a conversation with.
but the Gus story, first of all, I had no clue about that, and
Mhm.
just really great, like really, really, really nice. And I loved it.
Yeah, for those that don't remember who Gus is, it's the head of his security detail.
Yes, thank you for
Right,
providing that.
Gus. Yeah, no, that part was just super genuine. I just love how he developed a close relationship with his head of security. That's such a Michael Jordan thing
It's
to
also,
do.
you know what else is a Michael Jordan thing to do? Just that, like, it was all dedicated to winning and to basketball, but like the resourcefulness. His dad would serve this purpose in his life, and he was not done playing basketball, so he like needed to seek out other you know what I mean, have that social or that familial comfort or whatever in his life in order to keep doing these amazing things. So then he finds this old dude and confides in him, and I think we all need that. And that's again one of these things that really shows that regardless of how superhuman he was, this is still just a dude.
Gus is part of a 9-minute stretch in the entire documentary where Jordan seems human, and what I like is they shape peaks and valleys using that. Yeah, and I say, like, the humanizing is important. I'm glad that they dropped those in, but I'm glad it didn't get too like saccharine with it. You know what I mean? Because you don't want to try to canonize this guy. I'm really glad that it wasn't like that. I'm glad that they really went at the things that were in the press, but then they created that contrast by showing him with kids. You know what I mean? Showing him with fans, never kind of saying no. You know what I mean? Except when it was that 2-week period after he testified in the court trial. Then he was like, okay, he stepped away from the media for a few weeks, and it really provides that contrast of a guy who you think and then there's these little moments and his relationships with people, and you start realizing, okay, this is a guy who misses his dad and needed someone to fill that role, as you were saying. So I thought it was good. I thought it was a really cool, emotional touchstone of the thing. Another
side note.
Side note. Yeah.
Jordan kind of created that. Like, do you notice that how he never said no? Like these the modern day athletes, so many of them, they know it's part of their job now. It's instituted. At that time, I don't know if there was that same framework and expectation and stuff written into your contract about talking to the media and all that stuff. And Jordan just did it dutifully, like huge. And for that, like that's beyond championships and stuff. That's about growing the popularity of the entire sport.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think he I think he realized that. Yeah. No, I think you're.
I think that's what I think. How would I know? But that it kind of shone through that he realized that he was an ambassador for basketball.
And he took up the mantle. He took up the mantle of Larry. Took up the mantle of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson and what they did for a game, because those two guys essentially saved basketball and made it super marketable again, because people don't realize basketball used to appear on TV taped hours later after the game.
Yeah.
And this is playoff games too. Like before they had national TV contracts and, all that stuff. And the league looked like it could go under. And then you had, these rising young stars who kind of defined where the league was going, captured people's imaginations. And then as they were starting to get older in the late 80s, and especially early 90s, it's who's going to replace that? Who's going to be that? And then you have this guy comes out of nowhere and just completely dominates the sport. And I think any of these moments where he gets to we get to see him as not that guy, out of the public limelight and not putting on the face. Because you got to remember, it's like at that point too, some people have worded it as no one's given a black athlete the keys to the car. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They've like this guy is really the most at that point, especially the most marketable athlete of all time, and is the most marketable athlete of all time. And like it's to maintain that there isn't there's a lot of pressure people don't look at, and I like that again they find those moments. I want to move on though to Barack Hussein Obama,
Yeah.
President of the United States, which it was great to see him. Great to see him. He looks good. He's aging like Dr. J. Dr. J is aging very, very, very well. He looks good, and it's like I feel good. He actually kind of looks younger than his last term in office, because his last term was a complete fucking disaster.
He's not in
He
office.
was swearing on him.
Yeah, no, he just guy aged like eight. This guy came in smooth, and I'm like, come out rugged.
Yeah.
Come out rugged. Now he looks all healthy again for sure. I love Barack's part so much, albeit short. He does what only he can. Like in terms of like people just speaking and providing thought on, and I'm excited that now that he's not the president, he gets to honestly speak on a lot more issues. This guy is the Michael Jordan of just like this calm, collected, confident, even-keeled point. Like just anyway. And so the fact that they were able to get him and ask him and place where he was in this documentary, whoever thought to do that, like I don't even know how would they even have thought. Like let's see what Barack thinks about this and where he was at and how he felt about that lack of voting and stuff. And then of course, his comment was not condemning. It wasn't whatever. It was just honest and kind of
I think the one thing that his presence in the documentary did really well was, if you went into this not really knowing anything about how big of a deal any of this was in sports, his just appearance in the documentary gave it that weight. I think
yes.
that you have a former president, the former president, talking about just how big of a deal all this was, and also just the fact that he's from Chicago too, which also helps.
Yeah, that's probably what he thought of it. He's a huge Chicago guy, of course.
That's how the connection, like that's the connection I really like that they made. This idea of him as an activist in Chicago, seeing the rise of the Bulls, and then how did that affect on his younger social conscience? And I mean, yeah, he doesn't go in on him. He just talks about maybe that he was disappointed, but he also again alludes to this idea that he was really the first black athlete to be treated at like that at that level, and a lot of people don't understand maybe what that entails and what that what is the politics of that, so to speak.
That part is one thing about the history of this that does kind of rub me the wrong way, is that it was almost like Jordan superseded, not by any of his own doing, superseded like being a black man in America. And he was like this other entity, this superhuman. And again, not by his doing in any way, not by how he acted or anything, but I feel like then he became, like this more like godlike figure, as opposed to an even greater cultural force as one of the first black men to get the keys to the city, like to actually have this celebrity that
and financial power. The key is the financial power.
Yeah, of course, right. The investment, he could do what he wanted, and he could. Again, Barack talking about that and the race relations and everything like that at the time was really powerful.
Okay, the security guard, John Michael Wozniak, great hair, fantastic. He looks fantastic. I thought he played right wing for the Chicago Blackhawks. This guy was Steve Larmer's trainer. He looks this is another one of those humanizing scenes too, that it's like simultaneous competitiveness, but also like he's just hanging out with these guys. These guys are his friends. There is a desire to hang out with normal people if he can.
Yeah, and even still, he still has to gamble.
Oh yeah, he's gotta gamble.
Even if it's for quarters, but he's still got to do it. No, I love that. That's one of my favorite scenes in the whole thing. Is when he's just. What is that game called, by the way? I don't even know what it's called. The game that they were playing.
I don't know.
It's
I was
just
trying to watch.
quarters.
I was trying to watch.
Is it just called quarters?
Is it just
I
called
believe
quarters?
so.
Okay.
I think so.
I was trying to watch old episodes of Boardwalk Empire to see all the old timey all the old timey gambling games they were doing.
Yeah.
Something I didn't. So it's quarters. Do we understand the premise of this game? Is it who gets it closer to the wall?
Yeah, I believe
think
so.
it's like a really basic. It has to hit the. I think it has to hit the wall without, or it's closest to the wall without hitting it, or close to the wall after hitting it. One of the
I think it's closest to the wall before hitting it. That would make the most sense.
Yeah.
Closest to the wall before hitting. If anybody on social media would like to reach out and tell us the
Please,
exact
yeah.
rules of quarters, I would absolutely appreciate that, because I have no idea how they were doing. It's just one of those. It seems to be one of those complete degenerate games, which I appreciate as an individual who comes from a long line of people who play degenerate games and enjoys them. But again, a human thing, something where it's showing him not as Michael Jordan, but at the same time being
But
Michael
he
Jordan.
very quickly, the look on his face when he beats him, and then he does the shrug, and then the look on Jordan's face as he walks out, it becomes very, very Jordan. Like that loss to him could have been a Game 7, may well have been.
Well, if the guy was a triple team, he'd just shoot out of him. But unfortunately, it's just quarters, and all of your wholly given skills are no match for his pure quarter essence. One other thing I wanted to kind of talk about before we get into the meat of our list. John Stockton, for even agreeing to do an interview on this show. Like, he didn't have to do that, because I wouldn't do it, because his career and Karl Malone's career are almost entirely now seen through the lens of didn't win a championship, failed to beat Michael Jordan. The fact that he was able to actually come out and do it, that's good. I didn't think Karl Malone was going to do it. They used old interviews of him, and it was good. Jerry Sloan too. I mean, Jerry Sloan. You know what? Anybody whose career is kind of defined by losing, when it counts, if they're willing to come on, I think that's a sign of courage. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think that it's a sign also, courage and love for the game, and that they saw it as
the cultural importance. Yes,
right. And you can look back and be like, oh, those are the Jordan years, that's all that was happening. But there wasn't. There were all these other teams, there were all these other really, really good players. It wasn't a time where there was just one person completely head and shoulders. There's just like a great competitive league with a lot of things happening, and then one person that was just that much better.
Yeah, the drop off from Jordan is intense.
Yeah,
I kind of liken it to the like the Muhammad Ali era, where he had all these other superstar boxers that he had to go up and face, like Chuvalo and Foreman and Joe Frazier and Larry Holmes. And it's kind of like that, where it's like Jordan had to get by all of these unbelievable teams, like guys like Reggie Miller, Stockton, and Malone, and Isaiah Thomas, and all of these guys. It's kind of like that.
The rivalry is unheralded now. Like, I think the league is probably the best it's ever been from a talent standpoint, just in terms of who's coming up, the amount of players. I mean, super teams are being built. But back then, those were legitimate. I mean, even if you talk to someone, like, see an interview with, like, Kevin Garnett, like, he's a holdover from that era, and they have hate for these other players. Like, these were rivalries, and these guys were slugging it out in, at that time, a very, very physical game.
So, and they that is an underappreciated part about basketball, I think, that nobody ever talks about. It's a game where you have to be maximally physical, but not really show it.
Overzealous,
right? It just can't be. It's very blended into the movements. But what you don't realize, and they did a good job to let everybody know, is that it's brutal down there, and especially in the late 80s, early 90s, all through the 90s. Really, it's just war zone.
Well, you'd have to play Charles Barkley under the bucket. Like, have fun with that. Yeah, Hakeem Olajuwon, like, out of control. Anyways, I want to move on, guys. I want to move on to the list now. We went through the honorable mentions. We're going to move on to the list. The first person I have on our list, the first member of the Last Dance All Documentary team, Phil Jackson. Phil Jackson was, in my opinion, easily one of the best characters in this whole thing. First of all, he is an alien. Like, when you listen to him, when you listen to him talk, I mean, And perhaps that's just my, over saturated with productivity Western ideals, and he's bringing that hard Eastern, Eastern spiritualism, which I appreciate. Like the Rodman conversation, where he's talking about relating to him as a guy who left the reservation with the natives. I'm like, that is very true, but it's hilarious at the same time. I love it.
Yeah. Like I love Phil Jackson. I had I had no idea about his relationship with Rodman and sort of how he was able to kind of bring him and sort of just how he understood him as a person when sort of nobody else did. And aside from the fact that he's like an unbelievable, coach and a great manager of like egos and just, it seems to me like that's just kind of part of his way and his whole philosophy about life and all that stuff really played into how he coached basketball. And I just really thought that all of his stuff was really cool, just to kind of, and also see all those candid moments with him that they were able to get.
Oh yeah,
with the documentary crew
again, with the access, like just hey guys, in 2020, it turns out in '98 they filmed every minute of every player and coach's time. Enjoy.
Yeah. So it was really cool to just see him in his element. My favorite part is when he kicks Jerry Seinfeld out of the locker room.
So good.
Awesome.
So good. Yeah, he's got the juice, man. He'll get the sorry show about nothing. You got nothing to do in here. Get the fuck out. We got winning to do.
Yeah, we got motherfucking basketball to play.
Yeah.
This show ain't about.
Tell Kramer we don't have time. This show's about something.
I loved what Phil. Again, for the access part, just having that much footage, both old and new, on him. The other thing is, why do you bring a character into a documentary? You want to provide their unique perspective, and then you also want to show what they contributed if it's historical. And wow, did you understand? Because a lot of the times you talk about in especially basketball that the coach does stuff, but maybe not as much as like a football coach where they're directing every single movement of every single player ahead of time and stuff, right? There's a lot, it's a very fluid game. And then you see Phil dealing with these egos, the way he talks to his younger players, the way he knows when to interfere, when not to interfere, the way he has Jordan's respect, everybody's respect, really, even though I'm sure there was lots of bumpy roads there. And
without the respect, he couldn't have done it. Like to have Michael Jordan say, "I'm not going to do it without you."
Yeah,
that is something.
The craziest
and that's a level of power, because that's the most powerful athlete on the planet saying that. Yeah. So, and you can't win without Michael Jordan. My only
and that's respect, but that's also trust. You know what I mean? That's 100%. Like earned mutual respected trust, which is super cool.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong though. He's the whole reason for this Last Dance, right? He's the reason that Jordan didn't come back, or that the team kind of folded. Like maybe not the reason, but the initial kind of.
Well, I think it's actually kind of a fair assessment.
Point, right?
It's kind of a
starting point.
Yeah, no. I think it's kind of it's a fair assessment, because Jerry Krause was kind of just like, wanted to start over and was like, hey, you were not going to renew your contract after this season. Yeah. And then Jordan and Scottie Pippen were like, fuck that. And then everyone else ends up jumping ship after that. I mean, like, the aforementioned Steve Kerr left. I mean, he is lucky he ended up winning a title in San Antonio, thus winning more. And, Phil Jackson, I don't think they had any reason to do that. I think that it's silly. And obviously there was personal problems. I think that is very evident. I've rarely seen in sports such an openly antagonistic relationship with a general manager.
Yeah. What do you mean between a coach and a GM?
Sorry, my apologies. Between a coach and even a team and a GM. But
and I don't think you will again. And Krause, I think, was given a pretty fair shot in this documentary, considering the animosity that was present.
Yeah.
And a lot of chance for him to speak, which he loved to do. So there's a ton of clips in his own words. But I do feel a little bit of a soft spot. I don't know if Jerry Krause had a blueprint. Everybody else has him as a blueprint. Every GM in every sport since then knows not to announce be super tight-lipped. Don't talk to the media about any of your plans. Don't ever talk about next season. All of these things, right? And I think after seeing this, I think he's the grandfather. He was the don't do what Donnie don't does.
I also think Phil Jackson in this, he's probably maybe, other than his relationship with Krause, which other than them saying that they had kind of a falling out, they didn't really go into too much detail about how it went sour. Maybe because Krause was shopping around for other coaches, and he didn't invite him to the wedding and all that kind of stuff. So, but like Phil Jackson's really the only one that doesn't really have any sort of double-sided personality flaws or qualities in the documentary. Like he's just pretty good throughout the whole thing, whereas like Pippen and the one game where he chose not to go back out there.
Yeah.
Right. Like things like that.
Everybody seems to have had almost everybody in this thing has had a pretty epic public, because of their position, ego blip, like some sort of incident related to their inability to cope with their emotions and the pressures and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that Phil kind of didn't really. And
this is why he's an alien. This is why he's an alien. You don't see like everyone has like a moment where you're like, I punched my teammate, or I decided not to go on the floor because the play wasn't going to go through me, and all this kind of stuff. And he doesn't really have those moments. I think his whole thing. Okay, I can agree with like spirit with Eastern Eastern philosophy and like Native American spiritualism when it's co-opted and bullshit, you know what I mean? Because I think it's disrespectful. I gotta admit, he lives it, you know what I mean?
Phil Jackson didn't seem full shit at all.
No, he wasn't, and he's not in his books either. I mean, it's hilarious when you're reading 11 Rings and he's like, and then we thought we needed to trade Kobe, and then the next line is, Buddha was sitting on a lotus blossom, and it's like, so it's like a contrast, but the guy, it's real, and it's really good. I mean, like, he has Native American roots, he's very close to them, but he also lives that same respect. He's not the guy who's like littering in a fucking national park and being like, we have to respect Mother Earth, and
right. And some people say it because and are attracted to that because they think it sounds cool, or they're searching for something or whatever. Like the way Phil Jackson does it is like this, like respect, like when he needed answers that were not logically available to him, he relies on this, on his spirituality. And I think that's true. And that it's struck me as very authentic.
Would it be powerful? Would it be a stretch to say that he was the rock of that team?
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Jordan was the spark. First of all, you need someone to manage all those personalities. That's why I don't know if another coach could have done that. A coach who could do that is someone like Pat Riley, Popovich, like those kind of individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But to manage what he was managing and the animosity and the sideshow, because he didn't just have Jordan and his sideshow, he had the Dennis Rodman sideshow. Then you had a player in Scottie Pippen who was justifiably mad about inadequacy in pay. Then you have an entire team who's giving this random Croatian player a hard time because the general manager was openly talking about how he's the future of the Bulls. When you have two of the 5 best players in the league on your team, it's and Vinny, you touched on like this idea of implementing like these ideas of like Eastern philosophy and Native American spirituality. The application is the whole thing. People who just spout the slogans, right? But he was like living it, and he was like, "We really need to not actually." And I don't know how you live that in that environment. It's the least Zen environment humanly possible.
And and he brought the Zen, and to John's point, maybe that makes him the rock of that was center to all of that, and kept it moving forward.
At least like the most stable person in that room is Phil Jackson, the one that has the best understanding of how to get through this and how to deal with everybody, and it all sort of came through Phil Jackson anyway, because he was the coach. But
I mean, the guy was with big teams in New York when he played. I mean, title-winning teams. You know, playing with Willis Reed, Derbyshire, like all these players. Bill Bradley, like he's playing with good. They were really, really great teams. The last time the New York Knicks were in fact great. So he already knew going into it what it was, and he had also kind of seen the whole situation unravel. And he had also he wasn't the focal point of those Knicks teams, right? Mm-hmm. So he knew what it was like to play with great players and do what you are like. He wasn't asking any of the supporting cast to do anything that he himself hadn't done in his career.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's different when Larry Bird's coaching you and he's like, you got to be a sixth man. It's like, what the fuck do you know about being a sixth man? That's not in your shit.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I want to move on.
I can barely walk anymore, and he's still holding the ball.
Exactly.
Crazy.
This guy's got a punch ticket he's got one of those punch cards for coffee places for back surgeries, and he can't even move. But he's still like, I'm carrying up the ball. All right, guys, thanks for listening. Just a reminder, if you like this podcast and want to keep hearing it, subscribe and give us a 5-star review. And if you're not already subscribing to our YouTube channel or following us on social media, get on it. You will not